welcome, folks. This is the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House. We're picking up from our last work of 3 weeks ago, I think it was. We had Tricia Harper looking at the Feingold plan that was presented back in the early 2000s, as well as the current plan that was presented by Freeman French Freeman. Their review occurred this past February, March, and April. And we asked Tricia to compare those two in terms of space, square footage, as well as square footage for the committee rooms between the two. And Tricia, I know you have some information there that is going to be sent electronically, but some of us would also like paper copies of that, if that's possible at some point.
Got it.
You got it? So we should have our iPads.
So as you'll be receiving this comparison electronically in a little bit, and it is basically taking Freeman's Appendix 3 out of this program space use. It's an excerpt from there, comparing where they had listed the room types. Sorry, I'm supposed to say, I'm Tricia Harper. I'm a consultant with Architectural Restoration Consulting. I am working with Janet Miller at capacity and reviewing projects at the State House. So basically, I had taken this program and out of there, the appendix out of there, and reviewed it in relationship to Feingold Alexander's program from 2004, and their space plan, and that plan that I reviewed with you briefly last week of the addition to the State House that was proposed back in 2004, and what the program requirement was after it had been reviewed for 3 years since 2001 and developed into was at design development level when this program was established. Again, I'm going to go through those levels of design. The master plan provided by Freeman French Freeman was more of a programming phase of design, as we call it. The next phase is schematic design, where you're taking a plan from bubble diagram, which is what was shown in Freeman French's, to an actual hard line drawing that shows spaces and relationships of spaces a little bit more. Design development is putting another layer on those spaces once they're reviewed, and incorporating more so the mechanical, structural, and developing of the design and the program needs. So it's more finite at that point. It's something that you make a decision on before it goes to construction documents. And then construction documents is the next phase. And then after construction documents, you put them out to bid, and you're in construction and to construction phases. So those are the phases of our typical of a project. And
So let me just interrupt there, Tricia. So what we have before us with the Freeman French Freeman, as well as the Feingold, is the programmatic space use of the programmatic space piece that could be used to go through the schematic design.
yes, and it did go through the schematic design with Feingold Alexander.
But not Freeman French.
That's right.
So what I'm trying to get across here is in order to get to the schematic design, you need an appropriation of dollars to get you there. And that would occur during this upcoming legislative session. Because you need to appropriate money to take your programmatic design, your programmatic study of your space, that then can start working for your schematic designs. that would then put more of a context in terms of these are the options here possibly, and the cost for those options would be more refined. But in terms of the legislative process, this next session would only get you to schematic design. It would not get you to the deeper level, because then the decision would have to be made the next legislative session. Which plan do you really go forward based on those schematic designs? Is that fair to say, Tricia?
It could be done if a committee was formed in between to make those decisions to move to design development, which was done before with the
As long as you appropriated enough money
for design development
to
also.
get you through design development.
Yes. And therefore you could move the process along.
So it would save you about a year, because then you wouldn't need that next legislative session in 2023 to get you to the,
It's totally feasible to have both those parts of design accomplished before next year,
the 2023 session.
before the 2023 session.
Right. So I just want people to know, there's no way you're gonna get a shovel in the ground next year in the summer.
That's right.
And I think there's a false thinking out there that we can do this.
Yeah. It
So
would be, it'd be a challenge for sure.
and that's why I wanted to put that on the table in terms of what the process is, because there's no money that's been appropriated to date to even do schematic design or the design documents to get you deeper into the program.
And to finish up the program, if you went with, this is just a comparison of, and the comparison, Michael, do you have that ready to put up? Yeah.
A comparison document?
Yes, please.
Talk about the HVAC system.
So basically,
Sure.
scroll down a little bit, please. and maybe Everybody see that okay,
Can zoom in.
right? So basically,
Yeah.
the room types that are shown on this are the same. There was one room that Freeman French Freeman didn't have, or space that they didn't include in their long-term plan that I could see, maybe they tucked it under another category, was the House Speaker's office. So going through these, again, this is the column of Freeman French's plan is a direct copy of what they had in this plan. Versus what I added was the column to the far right with the red and the blue and the black. Representing numbers that are greater than, like that, going down to the first one of the seating area and the cafeteria, where Freeman French's plan allowed for 4,205 square feet, where Feingold Alexander's plan was 4,624 square feet, which is an additional 419 square feet shown in that plan. So that was the simplest. The cafeteria serving, if it's under 100 square feet, I left it alone. I didn't say, oh, that's 32 square feet or whatever it is, 36 square feet difference. Or that's the one above is 20 square foot difference. Those are pretty close, I thought, so I left them alone. So
Let me just interrupt. So the cafeteria BOH is what?
behind a house, back of house.
That's the speaker's office?
No, that's the kitchen.
That would be the kitchen,
Yeah,
okay. And then the seating area does that also include those tables in the outside of the cafeteria, outside of the glass
it
doors?
includes any cafeteria seating, yes.
Janet?
So I was just wondering if it would be helpful, certainly for me, if we just went through each line and maybe had a word or two about what it is that we're talking about, rather than, I don't know if you have that.
Yes.
Yes.
So the cafeteria is back of house, as I was saying, that's the kitchen. So that existing is 781 square feet. The Freeman plan showed estimated in their program 915 square feet and 935 square feet is Feingold's. Is that,
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
sometimes there's no difference, in which case there's
Yeah.
not much to say, but some of these things might be helpful to know why it's different. What else is provided.
and that I can't answer why it's different.
Okay.
So, but that's what they allowed for their, in their planning process. So the cafeteria serving area now is 665 square feet, and we're looking at about the same square footage. Feingold actually duplicated the serving area, and Freeman French added a little bit of space. The seating area existing 3,065, and the new is being proposed at least 1,200 to 1,600 square feet more, which that is much needed, I think. That's the Capitol Police is 147. Feingold showed it the same, and then Freeman French showed a larger Capitol Police area. It's just a difference of the timing at that point. The coat room, mail room, gift shop, and room 9, they're calling that. The existing at 622, and we're looking at 1,075 for Freeman's, and then even larger for Feingold Alexander's at 9,220. Oops, I jumped down a line. Gift shop, 1,589 square feet. That being said, is that they provided locker rooms in their drawings, Feingold did, where the committees, the representatives would each have a locker, and that it'd be separate from the coat room. And this is to the chair's point earlier, the committee rooms, there's 26 shown. Not sure for Freeman French's, which is what we come up with. There's 12 Senate and 14 House. Existing, we have 7,096. And here's a big difference. They have 15,046 shown on the Freeman plan. And then on Feingold Alexander's, theirs was 9,227. The part of the difference is that the Senate committees in Feingold Alexander's plan is just keeping the Senate committees as they are. And we can come back to this. Would you like to go through the whole thing before discussing committees?
Yes.
All right, because that's a big one. The governor's office and staff is 1,147. That pretty much stays the same all the way through. Even though the number's a little, again, off, it's the same. And then the hearing room, large meeting rooms, room 10 and 11. In example of 10 and 11, that they are increasing from 2,075 to 4,500 square feet, and the other one is 3,580 square feet. So that was a little less of the meeting room in Feingold's. By 900 square feet. The House chamber stays the same pretty much, just there's a little bit of a difference there. I'm not sure where that came from, but the House clerks and assistants, that was something that was really minimal. The existing isn't 495, so I'm not sure, there's an error there. The existing is 1,545. House clerk, including that whole second floor of space. A speaker's office also is somehow not shown, so there's 401 square feet that is shown in the Feingold drawings. And the IT in the copier room is at 392 square feet now, and they kept it the same, Feingold did, but Freeman French more than almost doubled it. IT storage and servers, they didn't count anything in the basement. Is how it is, and they have above basement level now 590 square feet is Freeman French, where Feingold Alexander had 236 square feet shown in their plans. The Legislative Council is 2,984, and basically 3,000 is what Freeman French showed. There's a big difference too, where the Feingold Alexander plan shows the Legislative Council wing at 6,066. The Legislative Lounge is 1,275 square feet. And then Freeman French has theirs at 760, and Feingold Alexander pretty much kept the same, counted this room as it is. It's a little higher for some reason, I'm not sure. But legislature's offices, Freeman French, oh, there it is, right there, there's it's 2,106. And on those, I included the minority and majority offices too, I believe I put in there, which Feingold Alexander's plan had offices for those two minority and majority offices. And then the Lieutenant Governor's staff, 500 square feet. They had an addition of 322 square feet shown in the Lieutenant Governor's area for the program. Meeting room 1. Not sure what meeting room 1 means really. It's, I think it has to deal with the room 11, 10, room 10. And, but that doesn't make sense either.
10 and 11 are up above.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what.
Would that be Ethan Allen?
It might be, but it's only 117 square feet. That's like an office. So, and then they had 4,000 square feet shown for that, and other meeting rooms that they had small breakout rooms in Feingold. And that's what they might be, is the breakout rooms in the House committees.
Little mini meeting rooms.
Meeting rooms, yeah, and they had 1,500 square feet Feingold and near 4,000 French did. Operations, 914 square feet. That's about the same all the way across the board. Pages, nothing from Feingold, 100 for Freeman French. Secretary of the Senate is existing 470, which that's a little goofy too, because the existing I think is 1,642 square feet in Feingold. They were keeping that same imprint of that area, and the cloakroom I think was included in that number. The Senate chamber is it is what it is. And then the Senate President of Pro Tem. If you could scroll up, please, Mike, when you get a chance.
Scroll up.
Please. I meant to the bottom of the page.
Oh.
Yeah, up, down the page. Sorry. That's good right there. Thanks. Pages. Secretary of the Senate, Senate Chamber, that is Senate President Pro Tem. That was 185, and they both increased it from 525 or 667. Sergeant of Arms stays the same all the way across. The room stays the same. Restrooms, lactation, and infirmary rooms is at 1,182 is the existing. And one shows one for Freeman French's 3,482 and Feingold's 2,258 square feet. So there's a bit of a difference there. Circulation, other walls, etc. 13,855 because of the type of building that we're in, this historic structure. They had 30,847 and Feingold had 3,454. square feet for those circulation other wall infrastructure, as we call it. And then the miscellaneous back of house, mechanical, janitor, storage, etc. It's about was increased to 4,000 in Freeman French's plan, up from 2,400 to 4,000. And then Feingold's plan showed 2,842 square feet. So the difference between the two plans, the existing is 46,523. Freeman French's plan is 86,923. It's their proposed addition, not proposed addition, the new footprint. And then, or the square footage, I should say. And the Feingold's was 82,740. So going back and forth between these two numbers, it was Feingold's plan had 6,934, so 7,000 square feet more than Freeman French's, but Freeman, when you look at below, so they're about 4,000 square feet different, in which would make sense because that's the difference between the square footages above. So there's about 4,000 square feet difference between the two plans. And then there's just some general notes there about what's not included and such. And as I mentioned before, that the existing Senate committee rooms in Feingold's plan remain unchanged, except for moving the pro tems from that office to the one in the 20s and the 20s agriculture, moving this one right here, moving to the pro tem space. But they did that also shown in that plan. So is there any questions on that before I go on?
You know, in what I'm familiar with the Freeman French Freeman, they divvy up the space differently than Feingold. What comes to mind is like the cafeteria. Freeman French Freeman has a lot of smaller cafeterias interspersed in the addition, wherever that is.
Okay.
It also has a lot more meeting rooms, smaller meeting rooms for those individual conferences that we may need with other committee members or a commissioner or some of your constituents. So they've scattered, Freeman French Freeman has really scattered it throughout the building. Feingold, they're more consolidated, but Feingold also has the space that they have on over here on this side, the east side, that's the east side of the building, where Ledge Council would go. Because at that point, we did not have 2 acres or 4 acres. So that's why it's hard to compare square footage for the overall State House, because they have different breakout, different entities. The other thing too that I find really interesting, back in 2002, 3, and 4, IT was not such a big part of our legislative functioning as it is now. But we have also gotten space down on 133 State Street on that first floor for our IT staff. So that's also in the mix here. Janet?
Oh, I was just gonna note the space, I think you touched on it, but the space for legislative council, which is a pretty significant difference between the two plans. Sorry, Alice, when you were pointing, were you pointing to the south side?
Yes.
Okay, because I thought you were pointing to the
No, it's the
other
Senate side, the east side. This
Right.
is the west side, the east Senate side is where under Feingold, they were gonna
Yes,
build
right.
a new building.
So anyway, I'm just noting it. I think, I'm sort of thinking where the differences are sort of more critical. And certainly staff space is significantly different. I'm also just curious to understand a little better about the legislator offices. I didn't understand the explanation that you gave about what's being proposed.
I couldn't hear you, sorry. What's
I'm sorry.
proposed for,
On the legislator offices?
yes, that actually, I think was supposed to be combined with legislative council and legislators' offices. Maybe not.
No, it's a lounge.
Yeah, that's
I think
after
it's,
the lounge though.
I think it's connected where there would be those small office spaces that legislators could use.
Use.
So then you don't need as much lounge space.
As opposed to those meeting rooms. So
Yeah, meeting
it'd be
room.
helpful to sort of understand what those,
Yeah.
are. There's the lounge space, there's the offices, and then there are these little, what we think are little micro meeting rooms, but we don't know for sure.
I think they can be further defined, the question, they're right now, they're all just sort of meeting rooms or office, so the numbers are in there, that's.
Yeah.
And what you call them is,
Also, I'd let the committee members know that Jesse Beck, who's with Freeman French Freeman, is available on the phone this morning and this afternoon if we have questions. So Jesse is available on the phone. Jesse Beck, he's
Oh,
with
yes.
Freeman French Freeman. So what strikes me the most that's different between Freeman French Freeman's report and Feingold is in terms of the space, how I view it, Freeman French Freeman has the space more chopped up than Feingold. Feingold really focuses in on a floor above the cafeteria, an expansion on basically one side more than the other. Freeman French Freeman kind of chops up the cafeteria, chops up these meeting rooms, and then they have the addition over here with possible another addition over there. That's how in a simple fashion, I compare the two. There's more cohesiveness of the building and its use with Feingold. Freeman French Freeman kind of chops things up more. And that's just the 30,000 foot view. Questions? Comments?
Yes, sort of, maybe it's a question, I'm not sure. I agree that Freeman French and Freeman feels more chopped up. And it makes me wonder why the circulation square footage is so much higher in the other plan.
and that's walls and infrastructure too, so,
So it may not be hallways, it may
Yeah.
be other things.
it could be the way that
Be height.
you're talking about, those lines between where something is put in one category versus another.
Yeah.
And that's why it's always, adding those two bottom lines together. One's heavier and the other one's lighter, so that could be the differences there.
It's also a lot of square footage devoted to circulation compared to the current State House.
Yeah, that is, yeah. But there's this, yeah,
You're doubling almost the square footage from
Yeah.
46,000 to 86 or 82. So your circulation is gonna, and you're gonna have a lot more mechanical.
right. Other walls. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's good point, though. That is pretty heavy. Both of them were pretty heavy in comparison to the existing. Maybe that existing isn't quite right.
That could be. Right.
It's hard to know where they, I didn't go back and measure things. I just took verbatim what they wrote and tried to categorize them under the same heading. So would you like to talk committee rooms? There, yeah, or you wanna,
I'm looking at committee members trying to. I think for us in the layman's term, it might be easier for us, instead of really thinking of square footage, in terms of really thinking the layout of the building
Yes,
and the individual, the needs of the legislative branch, the needs of our staff, the needs of the public, and also just the operations, so that you think, well, we need a lounge. We need a coat room. We know we've got to figure out the copy room, and all of that may be different than thinking of square footage. It's just a different approach than looking at square footage. It's hard for us who are not in construction or engineering to visualize what 3,000 square feet is. Maybe Butch can do that because he's lived it. But, you know, this room here is what, 1,200 square feet?
right. So, and so one of the things though I wanted to talk to you about on is capacity, square footage per person according to the code of an existing business use, assembly use. And that is 15 square feet per person. And that's with non-fixed chairs in an assembly use. So this is an assembly right now, they would be calling this. It's a light assembly. We'd be able to have we'd be able to have over 50 people in this room. And the reason why we would be able to is we have another means of egress out of this room besides that. But just to give you an idea of what the basic lines of the, code requires. And that 15 square feet per person is assembly non-fixed chairs. Just so that you understand, a classroom, because a lot of everyone has been in a classroom, is 20 square feet per occupant. So I think that is just to wrap your head around. That's where you determine. You've got part of these committee rooms. We've come up. There was a comparison when they were doing the HVAC about reported use call versus what the room capacity is now, and the comparison of those two. So you have rooms that are, have 10 people. This room here, agriculture, has 10 people in it. It has 10 people, and it fits. It's 15. It's 150 square feet. 10 people. 150 square feet. Right? 15 square feet per person. So there are some rooms that it works in the Senate. And if we just talking square footage, those existing Senate committee rooms, they work for is it 9 out of 12 of the 9 out of 12 committees.
What are the three that do not work?
And I'm just going to say there are committees that have 22 people to 25 people. So they're the larger committees and I can tell you what rooms they are. I thought it'd be helpful.
I'm trying to follow you here. So there's 12 Senate rooms,
Correct.
and of those 12, 9 of them work in terms of what's already there for seating capacity as 15 square feet per person.
One of the rooms works for them. I'm not saying their exact room works for them. I'm just saying that if you've got 12 areas and 9 of those areas work for the amount of capacity you have, like transportation.
Amount of capacity we have with what? The HVAC system or the 15?
15 per square foot.
So you're saying 9 of those committee rooms work.
Yes.
What are the 3 that do not work?
The 3 that don't work have 22 people in them or above. So that would be.
That's not the question. I don't care about.
I'm getting there. All right. So Senate Transportation and Senate Appropriation and Senate Finance.
Those are the three that
How
don't
many people?
work.
What do you mean?
Have a count reported of occupancy of 25 people.
Where did that 25 come from?
That came from the review of the State House
Freeman, that was
Freeman.
for Freeman's number.
on August 12th, 2001.
You have 25 people in Senate Transportation Committee on a regular basis.
I find that a little hard to believe, but I guess I'm not the only one who's reporting.
I'm guessing that Jesse's interviewing included capacity that can be expected for some of the Senate committees in terms of their external audience.
So if you look at Senate Transportation Committee at 15 square feet per person, how many people could you fit in there? That's more the angle I would approach it at, because there's no way you're gonna fit, there's no way Senate Transportation Committee is gonna have 25 people. We're only gonna have four out of the 5 members. And then you've got your assistant, which is 5 people or 6.
So there's 256 square feet in that room. So I divided by 15 square feet. Is where it comes up with.
Maths in public.
That's on my phone.
My motto, don't do math in public.
So, so 256 divided by
15,
15 says that there's room for 17 based on that code.
And we went through and counted seats where people could actually sit, excuse me, I didn't mean to-
No, go ahead.
where people actually can sit. And I do believe Senate Transportation, we had it at 18. Was it 15, Matt?
Yeah, and I'm not sure
15,
why
okay.
this came in.
but is that the airflow?
No,
Or was that
no, ours
actual
were-
seat?
Fiscal space.
Ours were bottoms and seats, right?
And they wrote 18 on this one. I came up with exactly 17.
So Tricia, when you took the raw square footage of 15 square feet per person, that doesn't include any furnishings.
No, but that is all incorporated into that. That's not
Incorporated into that.
chairs.
Well, you got 15.
Yeah. Yeah, and table, a desk, if you're, a desk and a chair, it's this area right here. It's the 15.
Okay, so
So this is not even 3 foot.
so if we stack the room with furniture, it's still 15 square feet per person, but we can't get into it.
Well, yeah, if you stack the room with too many file cabinets, that's a different story. But you see what I'm saying right here, Butch? This is just, this is not even 5 feet, and this is 2.5 feet, so.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, and these numbers, that's being talked about. So that is something that they're looking at right now, and it's based on 15 square feet per person. And that room is 256 square feet and the occupancy is 17.
So I'm gonna ask Janet and Matt, so what you've done here is based on 15 square feet?
No, our numbers were based on what the chairs actually are in there and how
Okay.
people can maneuver around the room.
Okay,
Did you want to add anything, Matt?
So we sat with the deputy state fire marshal for our district and went room by room and looked based on square footage of the room, numbers of exits, furniture in the room, seats in the room. Tried to figure out the right number for each room.
so this would be helpful to have this printed out for the committee members, for us as we discuss this, because what they have here is, let's go to Senate institutions. It shows 13 is the capacity, 13 seats in that room for Senate institutions.
Is this something like,
We're gonna get copies of it,
or
I've just asked,
sent to us?
yes. Well, it's with Matt,
Like to have paper copy,
yeah.
please.
But just to put this while Matt is doing this, House Judiciary could seat 20, House Ways and Means can seat 18. we could get paper copies of that. Would be great.
And is this information, Janet, that was not shared with Freeman French Freeman, or it's since Freeman French
They
Freeman?
had, they talked to us about it. They knew what our numbers were. I don't know exactly. They were basing their counts a little bit differently based on a different code perhaps. Ours was basically, physically when you're actually in that room too.
Right.
That's right about just, the egress and all that.
Code you're talking about is the fire code.
I'm not necessarily, I think Freeman French and Freeman would like to do a code study here in general, which includes a lot of different things. Am I right about that, Matt? There's more than just fire.
Correct.
It's HVAC.
Wet
It's
fire, there's plumbing code, you have to have a certain number of toilets and urinals.
Okay, let me just freeze for a second. Trish, you've been talking about the code. What code?
The building code, yes.
Building code.
But what does
Incorporates
that,
all those codes and under. So we, would incorporate the plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and the code being is the NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection
Association.
Association. Trying to remember the acronym. And that bases it on a building square footage space.
oh, I'm gonna ask the question. I'm holding my nose asking this question. We get into renovations. We get into building another floor or an addition. Those sections need to meet current code. What about this section here? Does that then open up the door that this section also has to be up to code?
It would be upgraded to code as much as possible, and then we are allowed to request variance because of it being a historic structure. That's why the stairwells are left open. The guardrails up in the, on the balconies also, I noticed that. That's something that was approved through a way that, through a variance request.
So we'd have to go through that again.
Yeah, it is another part of the process. There's a lot of the process we have to go through, the review with historic preservation and such like that,
So that would be with the Vermont Historic Preservation.
along with working with the public safety, the Division of Fire Safety, in review of the building and in all factors, including the means of egress, emergency egress, and the building systems.
So it's also my understanding, and we have Laura Trishman here, who's our Historic Preservation Officer, that we're also on a national historic list. So does that trigger anything on the federal level or a different level than what we would do here in Vermont? And Laura's with us, Tricia, I don't know which one could answer that.
We're a national historic landmark, which is a big deal. And Laura can talk about that, but I think the important thing you need to know is the State House has continually been about code compliance, and including historic preservation code compliance. So solutions are found all the time, every time something happens in a building. And we've been through a complete restoration of the State House in recent decades. We've added to the building in the past. It's a continual process of all of those codes meeting together to find the correct solution. Would you agree, Laura?
Laura?
That you work with code people all the time to mitigate the effect on an historic building like the State House?
So Laura, why don't you come on up, take a chair and come on up, because if you're from the audience, we can hear you, but folks who are watching on YouTube cannot. If you could identify yourself for the record. as well.
I'm Laura Trishman, the Vermont State Historic Preservation Officer. You are correct that we review historic resources and provide exempt activities for code compliance to ensure that character defining features specific to those individual buildings need to tell the story of what they are. This is a National Historic Landmark. It's one of 18 in the state of Vermont. It was designated in 1970. Because of that, any alterations to the building need to be reviewed by the National Park Service, which oversees that designation. And alterations do happen to buildings that are listed as NHLs. But the idea is to make sure that they are respective of the historic resource, respective of the character defining features, and do not yell out, I'm a new part of this building, that they're more reserved, they're in an elevation that is not as public or visible. The Park Service works with us on the review of all of the NHLs, even the ones the state owns. They're a very good tool and assistant to that, but we want to make sure that the NHL designation remains. Because it could be delisted if alterations are done without their review that they do not view as complementary or respective to the historic resource.
So Laura, when would that review occur? Would that review occur at the very, very beginning of the design process, of the schematic design? Or does that go down a little bit further as we get deeper into our designs and more specific? When would that review occur?
Just like with our office, the sooner we can get them engaged and review, the better. So that you don't spend time and money working on alterations and additions that then they feel would not be complementary to the historic resource.
And is this something that we could get them engaged like in a matter of weeks? Or is it something that they would need lead time of a couple, 3 months to know that we're starting to work on this? Do you have any base of knowing the time frame?
Other than they're short-staffed, I do know that they are working with us on a regular basis for the Justin Morrill Historic Site, which is Vermont's first NHL, and we're doing work there. I can alert them and ask for staff to be assigned to the State House project and start the conversations. And through you, provide them any designs or plans and start to get their input.
Questions?
I do, Ross.
Yeah, Butch?
Thanks. So Tricia, to be clear, when I hear, if we're doing a renovation over here or doing something up here, does that trigger code compliance in the rest of the building, and notwithstanding the historical compliance, mechanical compliance, the electrical compliance, the ADA compliances? Does it generally trigger that for the entire building, or in the case of this historic structure, would Division of Fire Safety say, let's just concentrate here? I'm thinking, we've got to run a feeder to the floor or something like that. Do we have to redo the entire electrical room in the current building?
In part, like when we did the fire alarms, it's you touch it, it's the whole thing. You've got to make sure everything's still working in every room when you're done.
Right.
That so it depends on what it is. Electrical, they do look at the area. If you're running it and tying it into a panel or a system that is not onto code, that is an issue. So, but typically the building is looked at, as a whole to make sure you're not changing any of the means of egress or or such that it's,
Right, but for just, as a matter of course, they would come in and take a cursory look at the fire alarm system or those type of things. And typically would they just look at like where you're attaching on the existing structure,
that's, yes,
not say you've got to change all these outlets.
yes, that's correct. Yeah,
So we would be in the clear there. However, should we get into some place else mechanically, I'm speaking just mechanically, typically does not trigger an entire building renovation.
right. Well, the mechanical system, that's tricky because it depends on if the.
I mean, the mechanicals,
Oh, I see. Okay.
using that as a term of art, I guess.
Anyway, the building is looked at as a whole, and then it drops down to the area of work and how it affects the whole building.
Thank you.
So I know Joe has a question, but I just want to ask this one. Does upgrading our HVAC system trigger any of the historic review?
Not from the Park Service, but it would from our office. Because we want to see where new ducts would be added or removed, where vents would be put in.
So are you being reached out to now at all?
No,
Joe?
It's early too.
Well,
No, it's not
No,
early
it's
because we
not.
have a very short window of opportunity for federal money right now. And so it's driving at least two chairs that I know of a little bit crazy.
you mean you and me?
Yeah. Laura, I'd like to dovetail off of Butch's question, which is as far as the Park Service is concerned, are they also weighing in on whether we expand that way, or up in the back?
absolutely.
So we need to have them involved in these discussions immediately, frankly, because that's what we were supposed to be talking about here today. And I'm a little, it's frustrating because we do have literally a limited window of opportunity to get these federal dollars. And I don't know who else needs to be a player in these conversations. But if anybody knows and can signal to us that we have to have more, Michael's got his hand up.
I would just ask PGS, I think the State House is under an Act 250 permit. And if you're gonna make substantial improvements, you're gonna need an amendment to your Act 250 permit, and that includes review of historic impact on historic sites.
How about stormwater while we're at it?
Sure, why not?
Yeah,
So you're gonna have the district commission is gonna be a player as well.
You and I are gonna have a lot of joint
I
meetings.
guess so.
Maybe we just need to make a list for the committee and others of all the various organizations that need to be put on alert, that we are contemplating something. Because as Michael just said, now nobody's thinking about Act 250 yet, but it's an important cog in the wheel.
Well, what about local permits?
Local and the Capital Complex Commission, and the list goes on and on and on.
Joe? Yeah, you need to come on. This is the drawback of YouTube.
Good morning, Joe Aja, BGS. As earlier, Tricia laid out the process of going through design. For the HVAC system alone, we're not there yet. We are looking at different schematic designs and pricing that. We should have that by the end of the month. From that, we will then decide what to go forward on, and any and all permit process will be taken into account. So when we look at whatever other additions may be done to this building, that is at the stage when we will do that permit process and take all of them into account. It's what we do all the time on all of our projects. To reach out to them now and say, hey, we're thinking of putting an addition on, what do you think? Great, what do you have for details? They're looking for the details, so we need that first. So the first thing is getting your program in place. What does that entail? the size of your committee rooms, what do you want to expand? Last meeting, the whole idea of, well, we're over 2 and 4 acre, do we still need that? All that would still come into play if you were looking for an addition to the State House. How big did that turns out to be? Where would you expand? During those conversations, because of, in addition to the State House, some of these other entities that we have to talk to for permitting will be brought in earlier than you typically would for a smaller renovation. So like with the HVAC project, here's some concepts that we're gonna have and some prices. Here's the low end, here's the high end. If we go high end, if we're tearing out walls to get ductwork in, stuff like that, don't panic yet, and inside of the same area, but I gotta run a duct up in the wall behind you, and it goes back and blends back in. That's one thing, as opposed to, I gotta put a bump out in it, or I gotta, move it out 3 feet. That's where, through the permitting process, we're talking to the right people. So it's a process of who and when to bring people in. And that's what we do during the program, design development, that whole process goes through. This Act 250 local zoning, you need to do that. You need to know what you're talking about, so you need an elevation. Local, capital complex commission, if they want to see that. So you're that far down the road, and although sometimes it's not great because they may not like what they see and have other requirements that they would like to impose because of what a town likes to see or something like that in their zoning regulations, and we're on the edge of that, then it goes back to somewhat of a redesign during that phase. But this is what we do all the time. So we do work with them.
So is it fair to say, Joe, that you really need to get through your schematic design phase first? And then as you start working into your design program, that's the
Program
point.
first. You want to know what you want to do, as you were stating earlier, about your committee rooms. How many committee rooms? What size do those committee rooms need to be? Because based on what you're looking at in the future. This renovation, if you're looking that large, you're not looking at a minor renovation. You're planning for 20 to 50 years out. So that foresight of, with technology, what do you think that room's going to look like? Is it going to be similar to this, where you have a semicircle so that everybody is working, or you still have coziness of what you have now, and how that whole thing lays out? Those are the things to discuss early, or because of the program, but that's that programming that you need. And then you have to look at your existing footprint. That existing footprint is, where do you want that to take place? I think the French Freeman design out here on the first floor of the State House didn't have any committee rooms for one reason or another. Is that really what we want? So all of that has to come into play, and that's part of that programming. Once you know what size rooms, roughly what you need, then you start putting the parts and pieces together as to all the house committee rooms want to be clustered together, whether it's vertically or horizontally. Same with the Senate. How does that interact with the two chambers? All that gets done, all behind the scenes, and then what happens? We bring you the pretty picture and show you and go, well, this is what we thought of. And then not just you, but everybody else looks at it for the first time and goes, that's not really what I was thinking. This here, people interact more than what you think. And it's a process. And each time, 3-4 times or more, you will go through that process to get to the final plan. And then you move forward.
Joe, and then Janet, and then Alice.
So I appreciate it's a process, and I appreciate the fact that all of you are familiar with each other and know how to make that work. We have a chunk of federal money that we have to argue about with the 2 other branches of government to try to get as much as we can out of that chunk that must be spent and projects completed. I believe it's December of 26.
I think so. At first there was no deadline, but then Catherine came before us last time.
Yeah, the point is that all of us have to be in fast forward motion to make these decisions. This has been very helpful and educational to learn who all the players are. I'm growing more and more concerned that we don't have the ability to spend that money in the way we want in the time period that we have available. I think that's just a sense on my part that it's frustrating. When I began these conversations, the main concern was the HVAC system and bringing the House committee rooms up to snuff for ASHRAE standards. My own personal preference would have been that that work was being done this summer. That hasn't happened. Sounds as if that decision is going to come with, what does this committee want to do in the long term, as opposed to dealing with things in the short term. And I don't know how to resolve that. But I'm very concerned that with construction schedules that have to coincide with the legislature being in session, we have a real serious chance of losing that federal money. And that, to me, that's very frustrating. That's my rant. Oh, and I meant to thank Laura for this past weekend. It was absolutely wonderful, and I had a blast. Just so you all know, I was using a metal detector on Arnold Bay that has nothing to do with Laura personally.
And he found something.
And I found something.
Good.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Oh, how exciting, but, and Laura's excited about it? My car keys?
I don't know what Laura has learned.
Maybe she planted it there.
Didn't find a boat.
Janet and then Allison was at the other end.
Stop. I just wanted to, I just wanted to kind of add to what Joe's thoughts were, because so the Feingold plan has gone a lot further than what Freeman has given us in the two scenarios. And then the Feingold plan, as far as we got, because that was almost ready to go, all the historic preservation and all that was already within that part that we have from Feingold. Is that correct?
It was reviewed, but that's where the snafu happened, that if there was it was too divided between those that thought it was appropriate and those that didn't think.
And am I right in thinking that also the result that came from that Feingold thing took 3 years to come to that,
That's to that point, yes.
that point?
And it's,
So that took a lot to get
Money.
there.
yeah, 2004 is the, 2005.
20 years ago.
And then we did have a 2006, just the addition on top of the cafeteria proposal that I've scanned.
So could anything be accelerated by using the Feingold, or like going back to them because they didn't have to start from scratch?
I believe that it would be accelerated if you went to them. I haven't talked to them, obviously, but the same project managers are there, the same architects. Mo Feingold, I believe, is retired, but Tony Shao is still, he's the principal in charge now. So,
But Janet, you're asking more of the other players, like the historic piece and all of that. I would think they'd have to start almost from scratch again, because that was almost 20 years ago, so
Code has changed quite a bit.
there's a lot that's.
Is that the same for Act 252? That was it even there, Mike, and 20 years ago were the same parameters there for Act 250?
It depends what you're looking at, because we've tweaked it so many times.
And the program has changed. I mean, I think that at some point it would be good to talk to Jesse about what did go into his interviews. I think the interviewing that he did is about the program. And the program now, I can tell you categorically, is very different from what Feingold Alexander was looking at. For example, there's more concern, I think, now with the public and the public interaction with the building itself, the circulation that you've been talking about, a potential visitor center. These are not things that were even discussed back in 2001. So it is a different scenario, the IT situation, and how that's transforming the use of our committee rooms and other spaces. So I think visiting the program with Jesse and understanding that program is really gonna drive whatever we ultimately conclude are the priorities of some kind of expansion. And it could be quite different from what it was back then.
But I'm not seeing that difference when I did this comparison, is the point, you know, that.
Right.
That basically the areas are still everything needs to be finite. Even if you went with either way you're going to go, you're going to still have to develop. I think that Freeman French would be behind a bit on this because they haven't been in this depth for 3 years of working on this plan from prior. But the question is, do they still have the ability and the memory to pick up these plans, fund goals and
Feingold.
and move
Yeah.
forward with them? But the programming change, you speak of this, but I don't see a big difference except for that one area of that having a guest welcome center or an area that's welcome center, but I don't see that not being incorporated into this plan either. So the thing that does worry me at this point is waiting for schematic design. And if you do a schematic design, you say, okay, we're gonna do a schematic design, it's on the back, or it's to the left or to the right. That impacts, that should be reviewed earlier than later about what is the best massing for where this addition should take place and how should this addition come into play, because that was something that is still, going on that we don't know what direction to go in. We don't have a good feed what is the way to go.
So let me simplify that. If we just did a floor above the cafeteria, it would not trigger as much than if we proposed the additions on either side or both sides of the State House.
I would agree with
I
that.
think you're still triggering the same things. It's just the review is much easier. From a preservation point of view, it's at the back of the building. It's the business end, if you will. So the impacts to historic preservation to the surrounding Capitol complex are less, actually nothing. So our benchmark is 5 years. So a 20-year plan that we reviewed is too old, not just for code, but for Act 250, but preservation ethics have changed and the building's continuing to age and things have happened since that 20-year-old plan that we need to take into account. But I will also add to Senator Benning's point, preservation at least is connected. Like we're criterion 8 of Act 250. We participate with the Capitol Complex Commission. Joe and I meet every other week to talk about projects and stuff. And we can respond to ideas, even walking around the building today. When you start to say, oh, we'd like to blow out this wall, you'll be able to tell from here up whether I care about it.
I'll join you.
So we can give you clues right from the very start.
Allison?
So it strikes me to go back to something Butch was, I think, trying to get at is I think what would be really useful for us is to bring all these timelines and expectations and needs for input into a map, into a schematic, so that we know when we need X, Y, and Z's input, when and with our dollars and our federal funding opportunities. So we need the money pieces and what the expectations there are in one place. We need who needs to have input when, in what, in this time frame. So it strikes me we're now almost ready to pull together that map that brings together time frame, who needs to have what input, what our when our dollars need to be spent, when our dollars in terms of the legislative time frame, in terms of approving funding for planning and going forward. We need now, I think, for our next meeting, to the best of our ability, to pull together that map and schematic of and that time frame, so that we can look at it and say, oh, by the end of this year we need blah blah blah, and who has to have input before we do the next design? And when is the program? When do we need to all agree on what program will be? But that strikes me, we could have that for our next meeting to pull all those pieces together.
The question is, who's gonna do the work to pull all that together? Is that you folks? Is it our ledge council? Who needs to do this?
I can put together what I know and share it with someone who can help put the rest of it together.
And
I
we
mean,
need
there's so many
Catherine's,
layers here, and I just,
but it will help us, I think, so much to have that. And Catherine's input obviously is, and our ledge council input in terms of our timing, or, yeah, but just, we're gonna need to have maybe a subcommittee. I'm happy to help and whoever else, you know, whatever you want, chair, but that will help us a lot.
Is it our intention to come here today to make a decision about the actual? Do we go east, west, back, up? 'Cause we literally are running out of time. And when you say the next meeting, JLMC has to make a pitch in the middle of December for this chunk of money that we're going to be fighting with judiciary and the executive branch to get. And we're going to be just shut out of that picture altogether if we don't have some kind of a concrete proposal in time.
and again, I go back to what I discussed with Tricia at the beginning. This is all gonna be decided in the capital budget, this next session. Because in order to proceed with any design documents, be it schematic design, program design documents, you're gonna need the money and you're gonna need the language to direct that appropriation. That's gonna be in the institutions committees on the House and Senate side in the capital budget. And none of that's gonna be decided until the middle of May of 2022. So any recommendation that we give is gonna be pretty broad, but the nuts and bolts of it will start to be discussed during the legislature this session with those respective committees and the leadership of both bodies. That's where the discussion is going to occur. Stephen, and then Butch.
I just wanted to bring everyone's attention, if you look back at the Freeman Friendship Agreement study, full study documents on page 42, they did set out a schedule with a number of the things we're talking to, design, permitting, and legislative approvals, with a 2-year lead time on it.
Please.
And it even has months and days, but it does talk about it in chunks too. Obviously, we're not selecting consultants and the engineering team because that is passed within this timeframe, but it says how much time it needs for each of these. Now that's theirs, but that work is already
So
been
that's a
done.
start.
as part of
There's
the master
something
plan.
to go from.
That ties in exactly with what I said, because your schematic design and design documents are not gonna occur until May of 2022. Because you gotta have the money. You gotta appropriate the money. We don't have the money appropriated to go forward with those.
Right.
Those deeper documents.
Right.
The documents we have here sort of work, but that's your first layer before you even get into the depth of schematic design and then your program designs.
It looks like nine months once the money is approved just for that.
Yeah.
According to their schedule, nine months.
So we're already 6 months past that. So if you do this in May of 22, you're not gonna really get into being able to get your construction documents to go out to bid before May or June of 23. So you're not gonna put a shovel in the ground, maybe in the fall of 23, maybe, but more in terms of May or June of 24.
It looks like the schedule they've laid out here, we're pushing it back a year. If we push it back a year, then those dates would hold.
But you're not gonna appropriate the total amount of money for the construction in this next legislative
No.
session. You're only gonna appropriate the amount of money to get you to
The next phase.
schematic
Right.
and your program design. Then the next legislative session, you're gonna appropriate the money to get to your construction documents to go out to bid.
And then we would finalize design and everything else by that time. That would be that next year.
23.
23, exactly.
So Butch and then Janet.
So thanks for that discussion. 'Cause I think we need to, I mean, last meeting, there was a long conversation about which plan we like to, what do we, do we want to expand the State House? Think lady, do we want to try to keep as much as we can behind the existing State House and then move to the east? There was a lot of support for that. And I never thought that, gee whiz, the National Park Service would have to weigh in on this because this would be a major change to the view shed on the State House if we build the public house over here and offices, or if we try to hide it all behind the State House, or that kind of discussion. That didn't enter into my decision. I was in the minority on that, so that's okay. But to Alice's point, what's doable right now? I'm looking at the Freeman, French and Freeman long-term master plan. And there has been some support for doing component one, which is the annex and cafeteria overbuild. So maybe we could, if we could come to some sort of consensus, is that someplace where we want to put $10 million or whatever, we might be able to move forward. I think the other two plans are too big and too far-reaching for this committee to deal with between now and December.
So Butch, am I understanding you correct to say we focus in on, for now, with our recommend, we focus in on saying we put a floor above the cafeteria?
That's,
And not make and not propose or make any decision about any expansion on the east or west side.
and if we concentrate on that, we get a really good look at that from Freeman, French and Freeman or whomever could show us what we really can get and really can get completed, because it appears from my point of view that there may not be any groundwork to be done.
Groundwork
building-
being
the
in the
building
ground
may-
or,
Yeah, earthwork to be done or whatever, but there's a problem with taking it up with air handling. Getting it up above the noise that's going up with it, so there's other things that have to be thought about, but I think that's a doable size. And it's estimated at 7, and we know it's gonna be 15 before we're done, but as things go. So maybe that's something the committee could think about. What can we parse out of some of this work with the least amount of, we're under the gun to spend the money. Get some work done with the most assurance that it could be done. And we heard last meeting that raising that component up will not be visible from the street. That component will then not be visible from the street. I do remember asking that question to Freeman, French and Freeman, getting the answer was no, you won't see it. So that's my 2 cents.
keep that in mind as we tour the building after lunch. Janet.
Questions, and just to note also in the Freeman, French and Freeman, there is a list of code reviews. It's not complete because Act 250 isn't in it, for example, but that's on
What page?
47,
What page?
47, I think it is.
47?
Yeah, well, 46. But I had 2 questions. One, how much money do we need in order to do the schematic? Fine, but what are we talking about?
That would be a question for BGS.
Dollars, and then I also have a question.
So let's just wrap this up. If we just did the floor above the cafeteria, what would be the ballpark for going out for schematic design and getting us maybe to a program design as well?
I don't know without really looking at it, but we would be looking at a percentage of your construction cost anywhere between 8 and 15%.
So it could, if it's $10 million, then it would be 200,000.
Doing the simple math.
But don't do the math.
Yeah.
Right. So it all depends on the HVAC system and everything else, and mechanical sides of it. I don't know if the existing structure is capable of handling another story. Originally, it was thought of having the capability of that, but with code changes and everything else, I don't know without bringing in an engineer to evaluate that.
So you're at 500,000.
So I don't know.
And we have some money, right?
Right.
And I just, sort of the obvious question is there sufficient money to do that if we were to make a decision sooner than later? Do we really need to wait till May?
Well, if the current money that might be available is under the CARES. That has to be expended by the end of December. So the newer pot is under the ARPA money.
Right.
And that pot, there's about 113 million for infrastructure. When we first heard about it, there was no time limit for expending it. When we heard about it from Catherine, there is a time limit. The language in the capital bill, as it stands now, the goal is that 113 million be split between the three branches of government. So, but that would not get finalized and appropriated until May of 22.
I understand that. I was looking just at the schematic design and wondering if there's a way that we can do that without waiting until May.
Right.
It comes through the,
I see where you're going.
Yes.
If we have X amount of money, can't we devote that to the green light?
the only way you could do that is through the general fund budget adjustment.
Couldn't.
That's the only way you could get the money for schematic design. Because the only other place is the capital budget, and that won't get put in place until the end of the session. So if you wanted to expedite it, the only vehicle would be budget adjustment for the big bill. And hopefully they'd get that done by March.
We'd have a 3-month jump on, if we were set to go for that, we'd have a 3-month jump on the next time. We would have certainty about that, which would be May or June.
So I have one question, which I guess is for Butch. If we build up, if we do the component that you're talking about, what is it we get with that? What
Right.
space is it just? What space do we get?
Well, that's the question we need to confirm with Freeman French, but what I quick review this morning, some committee space, committee room space, some meeting spaces become available with renovations in the existing cafeteria.
And actually, both architects had a build up.
I concentrated on Freeman
Yes,
French.
right, but I think they both
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
So,
So David, was the original plan, when the cafeteria where we are now, was the original plan to build 2 floors there, and the cafeteria would be on the top floor, and then committee rooms where the cafeteria is now? And then did that get scaled back so that that's where the cafeteria is now?
No.
No?
The cafeteria as built in the 80s was built in anticipation of another floor at a later time. But it was certainly not something that they needed then. And it was, I would agree with Joe that probably needs to be confirmed. Especially since it's now 40 years, almost 40 years old. So whether that capacity is still there is a question that probably needs to be answered by a structural engineer and so forth, to be confirmed. But that was, that was thinking ahead.
So if you want to get the money out the door quickly to get through the schematic design, where, Joe, would the schematic design be the place where you bring in a contractor to look at the weight bearing?
The A&E team would do that. The architectural and engineering team would be bringing in those engineers, and that's one of the first things that they would be looking at.
When they're doing the schematic design?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm just trying to get that time frame. So if you want to get the money out the door, you have to do it in the general fund budget adjustment. It would be about a 500,000. And the goal would be it comes from the 113 million. Or elsewhere, if we could find the money elsewhere.
So
But
I rereading the components. French Freeman's also suggesting that you do a mechanical upgrade at the same time, and that's estimated at 5 million. And then they did qualify their component one with saying you'll need structural analysis. And I don't know whether that's built into that 7.4 of the bill. They doubt it, but you never know. So let's say you need
what page do
15,
you want?
I'm on 40. So you need 15 mil, if you needed 15 million, because if you needed to do all mechanical work, that's $1.5 million you'll need for programmatic design with what we would have to look for and
Again, are you taking was previously designed, or are you looking to move people in? Are you looking to change anything upstairs? Are you still gonna have the committee room?
I don't have those answers, Joe.
Oh, I know, these are the
Your-
questions that I ask
Yeah.
when we bring in a design team.
Yeah.
And you go through that programming phase first. That's all programming, what you wanna know.
And I get that.
Yeah.
But we got to get somebody, if the committee decides they want to pursue this, somebody from Freeman to come in and say, this is what we're talking about in this. This is our suggestion. This is what we talk about in this build up. And then the committee would have something to talk about.
Yeah, so you're looking for an addition on the State House, and here's an open box. That goes in there.
That's what we need to find out what
And that's,
suggestions are.
and so if you're moving, let's assume that there's some committee rooms here in the 30s and the 40s that you want to move out of because of the crowdedness.
Yep.
Are you going to do anything with those rooms?
We need to find out.
Well, and this is where I go back to programming first.
Right.
And then your schematic comes after the
So
fact.
I get that. So maybe we need 1.5 million for programming, not schematic design, excuse me.
You start with programming, then you get into schematic. We've
Right.
done some.
Yeah.
I mean, there's everybody who is going to be, whoever is going to be the A&E team will take out what you already know and still have to gather that information, do the assessment. And again, if you put that addition on, it's still working around code, all the codes that are out there to see what, if anything, we touch.
And I get that.
Okay.
But I have to convince my committee mates of the
But
same.
that's,
Yeah.
then that, I guess what I'm saying is that goes to time.
Yeah.
And that's where condensing that schedule, if you can press that schedule, because you're gonna throw more bodies at it, your cost is gonna go up.
Yep.
So, and I have never been able to move a schedule of the permit process.
Oh, I think you work magic. I don't believe that.
Well, I believe what you're saying, 'cause we've been on the other end of that. Allison?
So I guess I'm unclear. The schematic includes the schematic would include, we'd have to come to consensus on what the program was.
You need to kind of know
What
what is
is
gonna
in the-
place where before you can even get.
Right.
the
So
schematic.
what's in the schematic is, I guess, my question. And I'm happy to do this afterwards, because maybe you did that sadly when I was in the
No,
city.
your schematic would probably include your square footage. You saying, okay, we're gonna put committee rooms where the cafeteria is. We wanna, this is how many
Right.
committee rooms we're targeting. Then they've got to figure out in the schematic design what that's gonna look like. Is that fair to say, Joe?
It is, and you've seen, Freeman French Freeman's is sort of gluing that together into some of the schematic design. But it didn't take into account whatever you're looking to do. So that sort of lays it out, and then you're going to the next phase to really develop, design development, to really make sure that everything works together. That working together can be that you're going to find out through part of the process in schematic design, especially if you're looking for speed, that the existing air handler isn't going to be able to handle the load of a new addition. And then, so what do? And also, knowing what I know today also is we have a neighbor who's not happy with the noise off the existing air handling system. And so what really has to be done is, even if you go up, it's going to be creating a vertical wall that may be pushing the sound closer to them. And what do you do with that? So that has to be addressed also. And so But so knowing that, we know that the program and schematic design, and you can take that into account, in schematic and going HVAC is over here, away from the neighborhood.
Right. So all I'm trying to understand is in the schematic is the program, the engineering, and then you come back with us with a ready to build that we're ready to figure out what it costs and.
No,
You're at schematic design, at the end of schematic design, here's the layout, the presentation that someone has been done already with a cost figure.
Right.
And we do design development.
Right, okay, so
And that's
that is,
another-
that was,
Then that's another phase, and we're gonna give you a cost estimate. Then
Right.
there's construction documents that really glues everything together so you can build it.
but before you even get to construction documents, the legislature needs to weigh in and say, maybe this $20 million is too high a price tag. Go back and redesign it a little bit before you get to your construction your construction documents are your final piece that everybody's on board and you agree with and you have the money appropriate.
so I'm just trying to get to budget adjustment, to getting to what we have to agree to. If we're gonna try and advance the system and get a schematic, get money approved for going forward with a schematic design, what do we have to have in place by January for that? And we have to have the program, we have to at least come to consensus about I guess I'm a little concerned about moving ahead just with one piece unless we agree to a united design and phase 1, 2, or 3. I guess I'm a little concerned about doing something that may not have any relation to what is done in the future. So doing a one-off without it being done in context with the rest concerns me. I wouldn't want to do that, given we're looking at a 50-year improvement. I mean, we're looking at, given the huge time and effort and political challenges of doing a renovation in the State House, we don't want to be doing it every 20 years. I think I'd like to be looking at a 50-year improvement. So
Don't know what it needs to be in 50 years, much less 2.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to completely confirm what Allison just expressed. I think we talked at a previous meeting about what this building would be like if it didn't have the current cafeteria, for example. I see the State House at a turning point right now, a very key moment when we need somehow to do something that alleviates the stress on the current building. So from a preservation point of view, I do think we need to do something. And if we just identify the most important things in the program, that should at least give you enough knowledge, I would hope, to begin to proceed. All of the details that follow will inevitably be a part of the schematic design, the design development, BGS being very involved in doing this, HP being very involved in making sure that it complies with everything we need to comply with. I feel confident we have everybody at the table. If we can simply agree, what is driving this? What are the key things that we need additional space to achieve? And I truly think we have an opportunity to improve the building for everybody as a result.
I think on the simple surface, in terms of what is driving this, is what we constantly hear. We need more space. We need more space. Committee rooms are too cramped. Air in the committee rooms, there's too many people in the space in those committees for us to function. We don't have room to move. Committee rooms are too tight. It's what we constantly hear. Committee rooms are too tight. That's what's driving this. That's what I'm hearing. I don't know about other folks, but that's what I hear. Steve?
I'll agree with you. As hearing this, as being a non-legislator sitting on this committee and hearing that committee room size really seems to be driving a lot of the conversation. maybe because the conversation is being driven by representatives and senators, but that seems like the biggest need is what I keep hearing. A lot of this other stuff would be nice, but larger committee rooms to replace the really small ones, and then perhaps the small ones to be used for something else. But anyway, my other point was I like the Freeman Freeman approach because it is phased. The Feingold approach is not phased. So we could probably try to phase it, but it's a much more unified thing. It's either do the whole thing or not. Whereas Freeman Freeman is in 3 different phases. As Butch said, we could approach phase 1, be able to encumber the ARPA money to do phase 1, but while doing that, have plans in place for phases 2 and 3. I'm not convinced that we can do all 3 phases by 2026.
Right.
And I would hate to lose the funding to be able to do something. And then the last point is looking at the Freeman documents here, their overbuild of the cafeteria is mainly focused on committee rooms. And if our greatest need is committee rooms, their phase 1 doesn't solve it, but that's the main focus of their phase 1 is committee rooms. So
we could do something very similar to what they did back in the 80s with the cafeteria. We could say, if we just put a floor above the cafeteria, but we build the infrastructure within that structure, because you're going to build another floor, so you're going to have a structure there. Within that structure, you put in the mechanics and what you need for the potential additions on either side in 20 years or whatever that may be. Because that was the thinking when they did the cafeteria with the load bearing. In the future, it's there so they could build another floor. We could build the other floor with the infrastructure in place for the additions on either side. Diana?
A couple thoughts. Committee rooms are clearly a problem. But there are other problems that I think people would agree on. One of them is that the cafeteria doesn't work. It's not big
That's
enough
correct.
most of the time. There is a need for some small meeting space or office, whatever it is, something. Sort of a, anyway. The other need that I think is room for staff. And so I think if you don't have to dig very far to come up with a little bit of a longer list. I also want to point out when we talk about what we're doing for the next 50 years, we did the cafeteria 40 years ago. Right. You know, and it was not enough. But that's what 50 years looks like. Right.
You add more space to a building, you're going to get more people.
Yeah.
But
And it was a great,
it was great at the time.
great change. It really was. And I can't imagine what we would be doing if we didn't have it.
Right.
But that was 40 years ago. Right.
But we also don't know, under a hybrid with all the IT that we're doing, what that's going to do for people in the building to access the legislature when we're in session. We don't know that. We won't know that for a couple of years. Allison?
So I'd add to Janet, yes, obviously committee room space, that's the self-interested legislative need. But quite honestly, we have to acknowledge that this is the second most visited place in Vermont next to Ben and Jerry's, I think, aren't we? Something like that?
Sometimes number 1,
Sometimes, so
but not right now.
we have to acknowledge that this is, and we talk about it all the time as being a living museum, but in fact, it is a museum. When we're not here, people are coming to visit it. They have, the tour. I mean, just being here today, we've had just a massive tour in here this morning. So we have to acknowledge the growing public need in terms of its museum quality and the IT. I was going to agree with what you just added, Alice. The IT needs are shifting big time, and we're never going to be able to accommodate all the public that need to be in a committee room physically. But we certainly now know that we can accommodate them from an IT point of view. So that is obviously going to And the other big piece, I think, is accessibility for the disabled community. I mean, that is a major need as we go forward, that in addition to space and everything else, that is something that needs a major upgrade.
So I'm gonna ask, and I don't know who to. Speaking of accessibility, and we start doing renovations, does that trigger any variances that we're gonna need with the access board?
Yes,
Am I correct?
But doable, I mean, I think that's doable.
absolutely doable. Yes, we also have a seat on the access board and can
Yeah, we do
steward
too.
things through.
And much needed.
And much,
All you have to do is look at the loading dock and recognize that that's our principal ADA compliant entrance to the State House. Right now, it's through the pandemic, it's been the only entrance to the State House. And it is not a good way to enter the building. I think that's where I use the big term circulation and access, I think, are other major drivers for an expansion. Particularly circulation here in the rear. of the
Circulation of people,
building. Of people, exactly.
out of air.
And they're getting into the State House and recognizing where they are and how they find their way, et cetera. It's currently not a good situation.
there's no welcome.
Do you see that as part of phase one?
I think it remains to be seen. I mean, I honestly believe that architects are very good at figuring things out as we go. And I have pretty good confidence that that's a design question that I don't know and have an answer for.
Alice, I need to put in a plug for this. She needs a bigger office.
She needs bigger
And
office.
I'd like
Yep,
to get that in phase one, whatever phase one is.
yeah. No, that's true.
It's
Pro Tem
also,
needs a bigger office.
it's also visually impaired and hearing impaired too. When you're changing your HVAC and stuff, that doesn't become the white noise that someone hears when they're trying to hear testimony or testify themselves. The building is not conducive to that. Exactly.
I mean,
What was that, Laura?
I did want to say that, so that you have the history, that just the addition over the cafeteria, Feingold did do a drawing that I do have loaded if you wanted to see that.
Yeah.
Because 2006.
so what I would suggest, it's 5 minutes to 12. What I would suggest, we've got a lot of things circulating around. And Karen, welcome. I know that you came on here about half an hour ago, so welcome.
Hi, Karen.
Let's take a lunch break. What I would suggest, after the lunch, let's gather in the cafeteria, okay? Or do you want to gather back here? Might be better to gather back here. But I think it would be good for us to take a walk through the whole building, starting with the Senate committee rooms and work our way up. I think what's also important is to bring with us what work that Matt and Janet did in terms of, these are draft numbers only, but in terms of what they came up for seating capacity. And any other documents folks might want to do. Because I think it's time to physically walk through this building and really look at it hands-on. So let's meet back here.
At 1,
How
5 of 10 of 1.
about 1:45? Does that work for folks?
Yeah, that'll be 1 o'clock.
Huh?
That'll be 1 o'clock by the time everybody gets back.
Yeah, if we say 1, it'll be 1:15. So 1:15, we'll meet back here and start our tour.
Sounds.
And then we'll finish up coming back here and process what we saw. Does
Right.
that work for folks?
Great.
And you folks, please come on the tour with us.